You too.
Bye. Hey, Barb.
Hi, Tim. How are you?
Good. You back in Ithaca?
I am.
Yeah, good. Welcome home.
Well, I'm not going anywhere for 14 days.
Good. Enjoy. Hopefully the weather will be nice enough for long walks up the hill.
There you go.
And we need the rain. We've been worried about our well.
That's right.
Yeah. Hey, Greg.
How you doing?
Good.
Good.
You can see that I spent the afternoon driving around the town for a little while.
Yeah, nice. Those pictures look good.
For what they are. It just reminds me of the extensive nature and schizophrenic nature of our town.
I've never been down to Speedsville. I'll need to go down there.
You should go down there, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a nice little village.
You know, I actually referenced Speedsville when I was giving a presentation to the town of Danby a little over a year ago, talking about a hamlet design, because Speedsville is kind of this nice square of a hamlet. Not much going on, but still sort of a nice design of it with the streets.
That's is, but you know, then everybody else lives up Thornway. It's nice to drive out there.
Tim?
Hi, Ellen.
Maybe before the official start, I wanted to mention something because you're our chair and need to determine this.
We are recording, by the way.
Which is fine. I'm not going to say anything I wouldn't say in public. So I sent around something about what might trigger site plan review, because we've been discussing that. And I wondered when we might want to discuss that. Because when the subcommittee on design guidelines was working this afternoon, it made me think, would we think differently if there were very small ones included? Would we think differently if we precluded really big ones? Would our needs for an economic analysis be different if it was a 3,000 square foot? You know, so I didn't know when we wanted to discuss that and whether it might be useful to discuss it before the guidelines, but.
I think I'm going to leave that to Greg to decide.
Okay.
Yeah, Ellen, that's a good question. And I have them up right here. And I brought that up at last meeting, talking about how not everything needs to maybe adhere to design standards or an economic impact analysis, or even a site plan review, that they all could, there could be different triggers for each review. And, you know, I certainly can weigh in about what might be appropriate, and that might come up more when I'm going through the revised standards right now, and I'm starting to sort of piece together some thoughts about what might be more appropriate. So this might be something that we could really look at a little bit more next week, but you know, it might still be worth to just chat about tonight, so that make sure that everyone is aware of that, you know, maybe it's not appropriate that every development that goes through the site plan process needs to go through an economic impact analysis.
Doesn't that depend on who we're making go through the site plan review? Maybe everyone does if it's big things, and we set the threshold at 10,000 square feet. Maybe they all do then need to go through it because they're pretty big. But if they're the size of Brooklyn's Market, maybe they don't.
Correct. Yeah, and that could still be in So I actually, that was one of my red lines.
Can I just suggest
Sure.
that this is getting
Yeah.
specific enough that we should wait for everybody to come?
Yep.
Thanks. Because it's only 7:04 and Ken's here. Hi, Ken. Hi, Barbara. Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
Rebecca is not joining us tonight.
Jonathan resigned, sadly.
Yes.
Yeah.
I sent you that, right? I can't remember what I've sent this week. I've had 500 million things happening.
I should let you know that my internet is super unstable tonight. So if I leave, it's not because I don't love you all.
How
We
is your
hope-
health?
We hope stability regains itself.
Yeah.
How's your health, Barbara?
Good.
Good.
I'm fine.
Great. So really, we're just waiting for Yasmin, who's not here yet. But it's only 7:05, and we know that Yasmin never comes until 7:06. And
Sure.
and I don't know if Bill's joining us tonight or not, but Catherine Seeley's not here yet either. So we should just pause for just a minute because I haven't heard from her that she's not coming. And I haven't talked to Bill today, so Mark will join us at some point, but I know he had a really, really long day. We're in the middle of budget season also.
Legislation.
Lots of discussions.
Yeah.
Well, it's 7:06, so let's just begin. There's no one here for privilege of the floor, so I can announce privilege of the floor and usher it away. So we have a couple of things on the agenda tonight, if not three things. One is to go through the design guidelines, which I think we'll want to do carefully. Another is to consider the definition of formula business restrictions. I don't know why I always repress that name. And I think that'll be fairly easy to do. And then there's the question of when that Ellen distributed in terms of when review kicks in. But before we begin, I think Greg might have some just general thoughts about where we're at and how we might proceed, especially because we're kind of at a tipping point now where we're getting really down into the weeds. And
Yeah,
how
sure.
we might approach that.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So, and some of, yeah, I'll just start by saying thanks for all the work that's been put in, and I've been just taking this evening here to take a look at the recommended standards that Michelle had sent out, and I'm going through them, and so it seems that we're at a place where what I'm thinking, these are they're getting tighter and a little bit more organized and defined. There's definitely still some questions in here that need to be kind of discussed or thought about. But I think we're at the point where I would likely just kind of take these documents, take the current site plan review law and these recommended design standards, and just kind of go through them and tweak language based on what I've heard at the meetings and what I have here, and then present that to you all later this week for your kind of review. And then hopefully then by next week, we can be looking at a similar document, but maybe more in what Caroline's current local laws have for the site plan and design guidelines. So with that being said, there are still some possible discussion points, and Ellen, before we started here, Ellen had asked a question about the economic impact analysis And Tim, unless you want to get into it now, maybe would wait till we talk about that, or?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we might as well, unless you want to discuss it up front.
Sure, no, I can just say.
I'm fine with anything. I'm loose.
Sure. So Ellen had asked about, in general, and Ellen, correct me if I'm wrong, you had said, should we, your question was about kind of what sort of trigger what would trigger an economic impact analysis. And I see in the design standards, it mentions that an economic impact assessment must be completed and submitted to the review board to enable such determinations. And so that means that any development that goes through or that requires a site plan and thus would require the design standards would also be required an economic impact assessment. And so I think what Ellen, what you were asking was, should we maybe parse that off into a separate trigger? And that's certainly something I think to leave open for the group. My opinion is that these are very costly assessments or impact analyses, and it might be something to consider if the development is above a certain size that it needs to go through that, or if it disturbs a certain amount of land, it must go through this analysis. And there's a number of other kind of places in the design standards where I think it might be appropriate to kind of parse out some requirements. So I had mentioned a traffic impact analysis, because one of the current design guidelines mentions the development must not or should not result in permanently increased traffic on local roads. And that's very difficult to even assess. It's just a sort of a opinion by the applicant. But unless they provide a certified traffic impact analysis, then they can prove one way or the other. But it might not be appropriate for all types of development. And typically traffic impact analyses are done for very large developments. And I would say Walmart and Ithaca. Probably had to do one, or any sort of development along Route 13 might have had to, maybe not everyone, but some of the larger developments along Route 13 in Ithaca might have had to go through one. So that's where I can provide possibly my suggestions kind of moving forward. I think, it seems that the group has kind of given sort of the extent of what they believe is we should require this. And I'm thinking that maybe now my role might be to go back through and just really sort of weed out things that might be appropriate for different scales of development. But ultimately, it's going to be a combination of sort of, I think, what I might suggest and then what you all might want to have consensus on moving forward. So.
You have your hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, Greg, thanks for that overview. I think that's getting a little ahead of ourselves, just in the sense that the bulk of this meeting is to discuss the standards draft document that we sent out. And for context, the subcommittee that has been working on standards met again earlier today and is working on fine-tuning the language. So actually wordsmithing this document. We've identified things like what you're talking about, like something might not be required, or it might be required, but the town can issue an exception, that kind of thing. But the real purpose of discussing with the full task force tonight was to not do wordsmithing of the 26 items that are in this document, but rather to go through it bullet by bullet to see if in general there is support of the task force for the concepts that are here, and then worry about the wordsmithing later. And I think, and I'm not speaking for Ellen and Michelle here, but I think we would welcome your help in all of this. But I think to consider that you're going to be working from the document that was sent out on Sunday is not correct. That there is an updated in-process document now, updated from the subcommittee, and it will be further updated with the comments from the entire committee, from the entire task force this evening.
Yeah, Barb, that's actually, I think, what Greg meant to suggest, that following tonight's meeting, he would then collate everything and recast it in legalese language to see where we're at. Ellen?
I think Barb captured our discussion. Basically, there are a lot of things where we really want conceptual buy-in. Does this group and committee think that we ought to do X or Y? And Michelle sent out a grouping, or maybe it was just to us, I can't remember, a grouping, because they were kind of randomly assorted, those 26. So I think, to me, most productive would be Barb leading us, and the revisions that this subcommittee made this afternoon, we did not share. We thought, well, let's just go with the document that went out a few days ago. And we, as Barb said, realized that things like an economic analysis might be overkill for certain things. So we tried to put some language in to give a little wiggle room there. But a lot of the other things are, must statements. So we want really to know, do y'all agree that that's the step we want to put forward?
And I think just to put a finer point on that, Greg, if you have a general comment, like as we go through this, the 26 items here, if you have a general comment to suggest, well, doing X would be way too expensive for the vast majority of projects that would come under site review, say that at this meeting so we can get the task force members to buy into that claim that you're making. And then, later on the wordsmithing to either take that passage out or to revise the passage to not be must, but should be encouraged or should or whatever. You and the group, you and the subcommittee can work on that. But it would be helpful, I think, at this point, if you have a nugget of wisdom to share with the task force, to go ahead and do that as we go through each item. But again, just to emphasize to everybody, not wordsmithing tonight.
Very good. Thank you.
So shall we get going? And is it Barb, you're going to lead us through this?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to assume that everybody has the document pulled up. That was the recommended standards that Michelle sent out on Sunday. So just a little bit of background for this. So to get to this point, the subcommittee, which is Ellen, Michelle, and me, worked with the current guidelines, which are a series of questions, and also consulted heavily the Danby Site Review Committee, Commercial Site Review Guidelines, and the Dryden Commercial Site Review Guidelines. And so where we'd like to start, I think, is by noting on page 1 that there's a set of general principles. And so we thought it would be useful to lay out the town's intent in general terms, what the general principles are that we're trying to accomplish through this. And then a next step will be to check if all these items of intent are actually reflected appropriately in the standards that are listed in the rest of the document. So one of the questions for the group is, do you agree, do you concur that we should begin this document with a discussion of intent? And that said, again, we're not wordsmithing, but the subcommittee's further discussion today would lead us to avoid some of the real specific items that are currently listed in intent, like screening dumpsters and loading docks, and keep the language at a high level of principles, like preserve and maintain agricultural soils in the town, support sustainability, you know, that level of stuff. So Ellen, I saw your hand go up, so why don't you jump in?
In addition to, I'm there now, in addition to taking a look and being sure that the things are mentioned that are intent are in the design standards, I think there are also some design standards that aren't in the intent, like the farmland. I don't think is listed as a bullet. So consistency between these two things, and I think that's great.
Can I just ask for information whether this corresponds to the general principles or the introductory framework of the current site plan? I'm just wondering what reference there is to that.
The current comprehensive plan?
Yeah. No, the site plan.
Oh, the site plan review law?
Yeah, yeah.
That
just
should
wondering if this
that
is
should probably
starting-
be reviewed.
If this is starting from scratch or, okay. No, I just was wondering, thanks.
Right.
Michelle?
I ask a question?
Let me ask mine first. It's starting from scratch, but it's like I noticed Danby had more of a section on general principles. So some of these are from Danby's. And then I sort of extrapolated and said, well, looking at our statements, then like the last few kind of reflect our current design guidelines. But so I think I put most of that together, but I did not look at the site plan law. So.
Thanks.
And Tim, let me just weigh in here that that I'll like lead the discussion of the document items, but if you could call on people and, you know, keep track of that,
Sure.
that would be
Sure.
great if you could facilitate
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely.
Great, thank
And
you.
Ken, you had a question? Ken?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Are you hearing me or not?
Yes,
Okay. General principles here. The town of Caroline expects that the design of any development should be appropriate. What is the definition, your definition for this of development? Because I work on Landon Road and there are houses going up and 2 more suggested someplace, or 3 more actually. And some of these things that ought to apply to them, none of them get done. So I want to know what you're talking about when you say development.
so the site review got,
Some of those houses.
It basically comes down to the development in this case means developments that come under the site plan review law. So individual houses do not. And even, I think it's up to, 5 houses. If it's a subdivision, then they'd be under the subdivision law. So that's why we're going to have a discussion about what triggers the site plan review process. What level of development are we talking about that makes people have to adhere to this? But you're absolutely right that individual houses are not subject to this. Does that make sense, Ken?
And that's a crying shame if you've seen some of them. But
I
I think then some sort of definition right there, what development we're talking about. The development of anything that takes, that initiates the site plan review so that people understand that.
so Ken, that's the paragraph above. We didn't start with that. We kind of assumed that was continuing from the current guidelines where it says the Caroline Town Board adopts the following design standards to be provided as a document to applicants and used in review of site plan review applications by the town's review board. So what that refers to is the site plan review law, triggers all of this. And so separate from this document, we are suggesting that the task force take a look at the language of the site plan review law to see what currently triggers the requirement of these standards and whether we suggest the town change that, what triggers are included in the site plan review law. So if you have ideas about, individual residential developments should trigger the site plan review law, that would be a separate conversation to take up when the task force wrestles with that question. Does that make sense, Ken?
Well, I understand, I think what you're saying. I know I wouldn't put residences in necessarily in a site plan review that we're talking about here under this when you say development. But I certainly could see where, I don't know, if you've driven around, I could point out numerous houses that don't come close to rural character or anything in my eyes, whereas you're trying to make all this that way. So that can be another section in whatever, I don't know what law you might call it, I guess. When the code enforcement fella is looking at, or person is looking at giving out a permit. And
So I
okay,
think one of the things
I just think,
one of the things Michelle was putting together from our discussions were topics that we would like to see the town address, but that aren't going to be part of this task force getting something done by November. And I think to add that to the list, to examine the impacts of residential development and how that, how that comports with what we're doing here is worth thinking about. And there are a bunch of things that we hope will be thought about in the future. And that's the kind of thing that zoning might talk about if we get to zoning. But I think for now, that has to just be put aside. I don't think we're prepared to deal with those kinds of development right now. We're dealing with what site plan review process would address, okay?
I understand what you're saying, Alan, but I also see no development that I know of happening to take care of these things, whereas I can count about 12 to 15 houses that are going to be going up. The population growth, the way I see it, counting houses, is more important than this here. But if your statement there, resolved that the Caroline adopts the following design standards, blah, 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 is supposed to define what developments are, then that's fine.
Do these design standards also apply to subdivisions? I believe they're looked at that way, and that could be important in terms of partially addressing what Ken is thinking about. I'm not sure, and I should know since I'm on the review board, but.
Yeah, no, it doesn't look like they do.
Okay.
But I guess while I'm just following up, and I think Ellen and Barbara are explaining it just sort of consistently with what the law is, for Ken, for you to know that it's not just, so the site plan review law, lists actually items A through O of types of development that need to go through site plan review, and which include currently all these design guidelines. And so it includes commercial uses. We've been talking about commercial uses of more than 10,000 square feet of area, but it's also institutional uses such as churches, museums, schools, industrial uses. It's the only residential use is multifamily residential use, and that would be defined in the law of what does multifamily actually mean. Wind energy facilities, waste disposal, waste storage. anything that impacts agricultural resources. So there's a whole host of items that are required to go through site plan review.
So I would suggest, given the fact that the design standards that we're about to discuss kick in only as a result of site plan review, that maybe it would help if we just got going into them, because we're not going to be able to change the site plan law right now, but we need to focus on the design guidelines for now. Does that sound good to everybody?
Yes.
So,
Excuse me one
Okay.
sec.
Ellen?
One sec. I'm looking at the site plan review law. I'm sorry, the subdivision law, and section 403 says, the board shall review the sketch plan application to determine whether the principles of the design guidelines, Appendix A, of these regulations are being incorporated. So it sounds to me as though it does apply to subdivisions as well.
There are separate design guidelines for subdivisions.
And they're not these?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe that's a to-do for the task force, whether it's this subcommittee or a different one, to take a look at the subdivision guidelines as well.
I think so.
Yeah, maybe somebody can make a note of that.
They're quite similar, but not the same.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so I'm going to move us along then.
So can I
Yep. Go
can I
Ken.
just ask another question here?
Sure.
On that general principles, the first sentence, Town of Caroline, I understand what you're telling me up above. These are the things that that are subject to these, the site plan review, but the Town of Caroline expects that the design of any development after development that requires site plan review should be appropriate, et cetera, et cetera. That doesn't make any sense to you, is that right?
Yes, we can add that language, development that requires site plan review, that's fine. But I just want to caution everybody that we've got several pages of this document. It's lots of words. And if we're going to wordsmith specific lines and passages, we're going to be here all night. So the idea was not to wordsmith individual sentences, but rather to talk at a conceptual level about what you think you can live with, what you concur with, or gaps or things that should be, gaps, things that should be added or things that should be omitted, concepts that should be omitted. So yes, we've noted your language there, Ken, and we'll move on. Unless there's any other comments, let me ask if there's any other comments about the general idea of including a section on intent. Okay, I'm not seeing any. So we're going to move along then to the section that begins with the language standards. And I'll begin with the caveat that one of the to-do items, and maybe we'll task Greg with this since he made an offer at the beginning of this meeting, is to renumber and reorganize all the items as needed throughout. So there are some items that are related to the same topics, but it kind of are scattered throughout the document. And if some things get deleted, that would cause the numbering to change. So, so we will assign that to Greg. Whether he likes it or not, we're going to do that. So, okay. So Michelle earlier this afternoon just sent around a short email talking about how we're going to group these standards for discussion. Because as I just said, there's some that are, similar concepts, but they're kind of scattered throughout the document. So the first grouping is to look at number 1 and number 2. That talk about complying with all laws and being consistent with the town's comprehensive plan. So any concerns or objections to those two? Okay, I'm seeing a thumbs up from Barbara. I'm not seeing any questions or hands raised. Okay, so we're good on those. Okay, so then the next set of items are a series that relate to protection of views, agricultural lands, forest, and wetlands. So these are numbers 3 through 8 and 10, and possibly 9 fits into that. So essentially 3 through 10 we'll kind of take as a group. So this is talking about protecting floodplains, wetlands, and slopes, preserving and maintaining contiguous woodlands, avoiding long-term detrimental impacts to agricultural lands, particularly those that are designated prime, and those that are listed as significant agricultural soils, addressing wetlands, attempting not to block scenic views, addressing historic, archaeological, and cultural resources, and also addressing natural areas. So, so that's kind of the grouping that we have here. So let's take it from with number 3. Any concerns in general about the concept of protecting floodplains, wetlands, and steep slopes?
Can I ask a general question just about the groupings, just so
Sure.
that we're on the same page?
Yep.
Are these additions to the current design standards, or are these a re-articulation of what design standards are? Just, I'm asking because some of them seem like they're site plan standards, but maybe not design standards. So I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Tim. And actually, to be honest, I would have to go back, excuse me, and retrace our steps on all of this. So, so just as a reminder, the current design guidelines triggered by site plan review law for the town of Caroline is a series of brief questions. So what we did to start is to rewrite those questions that are labeled guidelines into standards. But then we've actually layered on additional concepts that we gained from discussion with the task force, and that we gathered from the Dryden and the Danby sets of design guidelines. So I don't know if Ellen or Michelle, if you're positioned, I'm not, to talk specifically about 3 through 10 and whether they reflect the current town guidelines or if any of those are new.
So looking at the current guidelines, I think all of those are included in the current guidelines. They're not new concepts. It talks there, but as you say, they're all addressed as questions. Will there be a buffer? And this is saying there must be a buffer. So I don't think these are new concepts.
No, sorry, I was just asking because it just, you know, if we need to differentiate between what's in the site plan to kick into review and what's in design, but that's something that Greg can also parse out along the way.
Yep.
Thanks. Sorry about that. Yasmin?
Question on number 3. What does it mean by essential infrastructures or passive recreation amenities? I'm not sure what those are.
So that is something that is in the current town guidelines. Essential infrastructures would be buildings or other structures that are judged by the town to be essential for the town's functioning or the town's values and goals, that would impinge negatively on floodplains or wetlands or steep slopes. And passive recreation amenities are things like, you know, like view sheds or hiking, those kinds of things. So Ellen, you're involved with the site review guidelines, so maybe you can elaborate on that.
Well, I think perhaps not as relevant here, but things like sewer lines would be considered essential infrastructure. Or maybe the town, there's going to be a road and it's going to have to go across, or maybe there's going to be a boardwalk so you can look at the wetlands. So it's things like that. That's enough. Yasmin had a question.
Yeah, well, when it says infrastructure, we must be specific, like pipeline, road, the electric, the power line, the telephone line. Those are infrastructure. So don't mix it with the building. Okay, that's maybe my additional. But I just want to question. Maybe I'm wrong. Do you think number 4, 7, and 10 has a similarity? So maybe if we can, make 4, 7, 10 together, maybe like more specific. I don't know.
Yes.
Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, let me just respond to that, Yasmin. Yes,
Yeah.
so I think you're very much on target with what the subcommittee discussed this afternoon.
Yeah.
So we have in our revised version, which you don't have, we've combined 4 and 7. And that's something that Greg may then take a look at and combine 10 into that as well. Any other comments on this?
So on 6, you raise a question. A vegetative buffer, how big? Do you have access to any wisdom?
Michelle, do you want to?
So you're looking at number 6, right? Okay.
Yeah, I think in
Okay.
the newest version, we do have a 50-foot vegetative buffer, and we got that from the town of Ithaca. It has some documents on the size of the buffer and how you calculate it.
And in
Yeah.
addition, there is a law in Caroline, which is sediment and erosion control law, and it addresses the need for buffers. It mentions 50 feet, but it doesn't preclude doing something in that 50 feet. But that law also references a 50-foot buffer. And as Michelle was saying, the definition of 50 feet is that from the center of the stream, from the edge of the stream. So there's definitions to be fleshed out. But I think with our sediment and erosion law, we're on target and can deal with that.
Yeah, let me jump in here with number 5, just to point out and get folks to weigh in on this, that one of the things that this standard number 5 does is to really try to focus in on the importance of preserving as possible agricultural land. And it talks about prime agricultural land, which is actually included and referenced in the town comprehensive plan in one of the maps in the comprehensive plan, but also the idea of minimizing impact to significant agricultural soils, which are less good than prime, but still good and significant. And so just, again, we're working on fine tuning the language to number 5, but just as a concept, our task force members on board with the notion of having a standard that relates to aiming to preserve and support agricultural lands. I'm seeing some head nodding. Okay, I'm not seeing any disagreement. Okay, so that's useful. Thank you. Okay, I think Barbara touched on 6. Was there anything else there on 6?
6, does that mean that 50 feet has to be on the development property, or if their property isn't big enough? How do I want to say this? I mean, what if they only have 25 feet of space to have vegetation?
Yes.
I can see if they got less than that, they're almost in the water.
Yes, that's a great question, Ken.
I'm just wondering if that could be changed to 25.
So no, what is being suggested here is to comply with the town's sediment and erosion control law language, which relates to 50 feet, but also, remember that that the site plan review law, at least in its current form, I believe pertains only to sites that are 1 acre or more. And the problem with not including this 50-foot buffer on the development property itself is that the developer doesn't have control of adjacent property. So even, so the developer may say, okay, well, I'm not able to provide the buffer, but my neighbor will. But they can't guarantee that, of course, because they don't own that neighboring property.
I'm having a little trouble with the native species, a vegetative buffer of native species to the extent possible. I think that would be very hard to monitor and police. We've got honeysuckle, buckthorn. There are just so many invasives in our landscape today that I think it may be sort of beyond reasonable to require or to call for native species. Yeah.
So
Well, I think, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Michelle.
No, I was going to say it's not required there. It's like, to the extent possible.
Yeah, but.
And I think what this is talking about is if you are, and this is when the sediment erosion control people came and did the review of a development here, it was if you're planting things, you plant things that are native.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't say you got to go rip up everything that's there and plant native. So I think you're right. There's a lot of invasives, and it may well be better for the stream to leave what's there rather than mess around. So that's why it does say to the extent possible.
Yeah, and we'll add, Barbara, that's a great point to raise. We'll add clarifying language that refers to a planted buffer. So we'll clarify that. Thank you. Okay, number 7, we've already said that we would incorporate with number 4, kind of into, into protection of woodlands and those kinds of things. And again, you'll all get another shot at the, the next version of this to, fine tune language more. Number 8.
Can I ask you a question about number 7, Barb?
Sure.
I was looking at trying to compare it to the current design standards. Is the greater than 5 acres for disturbing large woodlands new, or is that something we already have? I didn't see it.
Michelle or Ellen, do you have that pulled up?
I have the new version, but I didn't add anything there. I don't think. Maybe I did.
No, I mean from the current law.
What does it say on? Oh, I don't have the current law in front of me.
I mean, I guess I was just wondering what that would mean, so that if.
Wait, Ellen's trying to explain something.
Yeah. Ellen, you're on mute.
The current one says, will the proposed development preserve and maintain mature woodlands, existing fields, pastures, and meadows, and create a sufficient barrier buffer to minimize conflicts, blah, blah, blah. Is it located on open fields or pastures, blah, blah, blah. So it addresses it to that extent.
Right, so the numerical 5 acres is an addition then?
No, number 7 of the existing one, does it incorporate existing hedgerows, tree lines, or fields and minimize impacts on large woodlands?
I see that.
Within
Okay,
5
acres, okay.
So especially those, so it reflects what's already there.
I guess I was just wondering what would happen to somebody who had 15 acres of land and the road was all the way down the hill and they needed to build a road up the land in order to develop the property in a minimal way. Because basically the current language in terms of, something we just might think about, the positives and negatives of what I like about usually the must language. This basically would preclude that.
Okay, so we'll make a note about to take a careful look at that and either revise the language or add an exception to the ability to make an exception if appropriate. So we'll take a look at that. Okay.
Does that on the woodlands, does that make a difference with number 4 where it says maintain mature woodlands?
Yes. So Ken, what we've
no...
done, yes, great question. And the subcommittee, the new language that we've worked on this afternoon and our fine tuning would combine number 4 and number 7 into one statement about contiguous woodlands. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to number 8. So this, again, the concept here is to try to preserve scenic views and vistas and not cite new construction on prominent hilltops or ridges. One thing I'll point out here that the subcommittee is recommending that we not say that development should rather take advantage of lower topographic features because development has to go somewhere, and we're not recommending that development only go like in valleys and lowlands. So the idea here is to preserve, significant scenic views and vistas and hilltops and ridges. Ellen?
So I was researching scenic views, and there was a process in 2008 at the county level where a consultant identified 500 views and then sent out to the public, and the public saw photographs of these views and voted on them. And there are not very many in Caroline. They are in the comp plan, the ones that passed muster. There are lots in the city and lots in the town. And I think that's because that's where the people were that responded to this thing. But the view, for example, that is from Landon Road area down the White Church Valley isn't scored as anything special. Whereas I think most of us would say, wow, that's a really important view. So we don't have any other good, other than the map and the comp plan, we don't have any objective mapping of scenic views. And I think a lot of us would like a lot of different views. So one of the recommendations that we have, I think, is to look forward and think about doing something to address scenic views in the town, because I don't think we currently have a handle on it or any way to be objective about it.
So that would be a recommendation to the town that they engage in a process to do that in the future.
Yep.
On this number 8, and it's saying to not put new construction on hilltops or ridges, or but then you're saying you're taking out the advantage of lower topographic features.
Yeah. So what we're
with your idea of site review, it would seem like a building on the top of a hill would be less conspicuous than one on the side of a hill.
I don't know. I think it would depend on the size of the structure and the type of construction, the amount of clearing that goes on the side of the hill and on the hilltop. I don't know that that's necessarily a yes answer to your question, Ken.
I think that this is a problematic number here. I think that a lot of the scenic view comments or in the document had to do with the looking at the view often, which was maybe a scenic hillside. And that's why that's what this says. To me, it does not address at all blocking the view at the road, right? So there's this lovely view of this hillside, don't build and disturb that. But the fact that you can see this view from the road is important. And so to me, it's important to try to preserve scenic views from the roadway, not the distant view entirely, but really how you're getting to see that view. But I think, so I'm not too into being specific about where you should or should not put it, because I think Ken's point is a good one. I mean, Deer Run is quite an eyesore and it's just the hillside. So I would take out that whole sentence. I mean, and conceptually, basically say, we're gonna have to, I think it's just gonna be a really hard one to deal with.
Any other thoughts on that one?
Is in the comprehensive plan, don't they only map 2 particular views that are most important?
I think there are a few more than that, but they're not many, Ken.
Yeah, there's several. It's map 3-10 in the comprehensive plan, and you're right. There's like two different levels of significance for them, but there's not a lot. You're absolutely right. There's not a lot.
And those are based on the county maps.
Right.
Planning.
You know, I'm wondering if this is so almost idiosyncratic that in each particular case, you might, you know, part of the site review process might be to get what in Latin America is called consulta previa, get people involved to talk about whether this is would be a significant alteration of a view shed or not. You know, it seems that it needs a different kind of response than just a site plan review.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah.
So, so the DEC, through their Environmental Quality Review Act, does assess impacts on aesthetics, but that's only if a project needs to go through. And we haven't touched on SEEKR, the State Environmental Quality Review. We haven't touched on that, and that's because it's administered by the state, but it is a self-enforcing kind of local. It's a self-enforcing law essentially by municipalities, and there's certain levels of review. And I'm guessing that Ellen is more familiar with those, being on the site plan review board. But so just to answer your question, that there is sort of a backstop to having a state review look at visual impacts on visual resources, but they will look at what the town will say about the impacts on those resources. So the town, as the lead agency, if they are the lead agency on a project, meaning the town is either going to say that there's no impact or a small impact, or there's going to be a large to significant impact on this resource. And there are many types of resources that are listed. And the DEC does give, I'm looking at it right now, they do have a very good workbook online about how you assess and mitigate visual and aesthetic impacts. The town could use some of these resources to look at, but it does state, and just to kind of answer a couple of previous questions about how do we decide on what's a visual resource and what's not, and there's reference to a county document. According to the state, really, there's just 2 ways to identify aesthetic resources, and that's through your comprehensive plan or zoning. So I just wanted to add that about visual impact, and certainly I can talk more about it, but or I can pass along some of this information from the state about how to assess it. But really, if it's not in your comprehensive plan, it's going to be difficult. You'd have to do a separate study. Town would have to go through a separate study on that.
Yeah, and so that may limit us in the design standards to referring to the map that's in the town's comprehensive plan. That's a good
Correct.
point. Yep. Okay. Okay, so shall we move on to number 9 in concept, the notion that the site plan development proposal has to identify historic, archaeological, and cultural resources, and if any, and protect those sufficiently. So any thoughts on that in concept? Okay, I'm not hearing anything. Okay. All right.
Barb,
Yes.
Barb,
Yes.
just back on the number 8 there. Ellen said that she didn't even care for number 8, it sounded like. And so we're leaving it in the way it is. Are we taking out that last sentence, or what did, or you've got another scenario in your other batch that you've worked on today?
That's on, given the conversation we just had with you all this evening, that's now marked on our to-do list as something that needs more attention. And if the only thing that we can do is to refer to the few areas that are actually listed in the comprehensive plan map, that's how we'll leave this. But I don't think I'm hearing that we should delete the effort to protect scenic views and vistas altogether, but rather we may just, as a practical matter, have to limit that to what is mapped in the comprehensive plan. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so let's see. So we're moving on to number 10, which is kind of in this group of natural areas. And here the town comprehensive plan has a map, map 3.9 that we can refer to. It's not referred to currently, but we can refer to that in revised language. And also still in process is the notion of what other kinds of indicators of significant natural communities are there. So Ellen is working on this a bit with some of the bird habitat folks that she works with. So again, here it's not so much the specific language, but the concept of do you in general support kind of the protection of natural areas that will be defined in some way in the final language, but just that concept. And again, we're still working on this because this is a more complicated one. So any concerns about including something related to protecting natural areas? Barbara? I'm not hearing you.
I would add herps because there are now road crossings. And I think, that it's just to flesh it out a little.
Yeah, great point. I think I think the idea here was to look at data or other kind of other like expert judgments on what natural areas are, and so we'll add that to the list of trying to explore whether there's any herptile data or standards that exist that we could draw from.
Great.
Okay. Okay, moving on to, so now we're kind of getting into a set, number 11, 12, and 13, that are addressing impacts on town traffic, existing businesses, kind of, parking and transportation infrastructure. Yusman?
Yes, number 12 is good. I like it. I think, I don't know, is it possible to rearrange the number?
Absolutely.
So it's better number 12 become number 11, the first one, because it's like give like more general. And then number 11 and 13 actually is about transportation, but it's really, really related. But this is good because we cannot, I mean, we cannot allow any new business that affect the local business and then, you know, affect the traffic and stuff. I don't know. This is my 2 cents. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I've made a note about that, and we're going to assign Greg with thinking through a logical order and grouping of these things in the next version that comes out. So thank you.
Does number 12 get us into adverse economic impact review?
Yes, and I'll point out that both on number 11 and number 12, we think both of those, if on number 11 it talks about a certified traffic analysis being required, and number 12 talks about an economic impact assessment being submitted. We, the subcommittee this afternoon, were a bit uncomfortable with that being required for everything that would fall under this site plan review process, because some developments are going to be rather small and the budgets are going to be limited for them. And so on both of these, 11 and 12, we will suggest for the next revision, including language, you know, something about except as waived by the town, or at the discretion, you know, requiring at the discretion of the town, you know, something like that. So it's not required of all developments, just because it could be rather burdensome. Does that address your question? Or Greg has something?
Yeah, I think this though is beyond design. I don't disagree with it being considered by any means, but this is not a design consideration.
Which one?
Number 12.
Number 12. Okay.
So what I would recommend is that this would go in the site plan review law.
Okay.
Somewhere, and I'm kind of looking at the site plan review law, sort of just thinking about the logical place it would go. But it could even be, you know, so for example, in the site plan review law, there is an effect on existing uses, and it gives a statement about uses and structures that are lawfully in existence at the date of this local law. It could just be another simple paragraph of, or not, it could be more detailed, you know, but just saying if a development meets these thresholds, or you can make it mushy. You could say it could be at the discretion of the review board, but you know, you can kind of go from making it a possibility to having some set thresholds for it to be required. But I would recommend that it should go in the site plan review law if it were to go anywhere.
Okay, thanks. That's very helpful. Okay, so that note is captured in the notes on this document that I'll share with you after the meeting. Okay, so
Number
Yep.
11.
Yep.
Is I don't quite understand when it's not front directly on existing public roads, and how do I want to say? Usually, the entrance of a formula business looks out to that public road. So are you saying it has to be 50 feet back of a public road, or I'm not sure how you do what you're saying there, and how it I understand. Well, yeah. I mean, if I don't understand, that's sorry.
I can explain this maybe, if unless Barb or
no, go ahead.
So I think, Ken, when I read this standard, what I read is that it's not an urban development. So if you were to say a development must front directly on an existing public road, it would be the building is brought right up to landscaping and sidewalk, and it's right there, and then all the parking would be tucked behind it. What I read is that it should be set back away. Traditionally, these types of standards are in zoning ordinances where it'll give a setback that a building must be, or either a minimum or a maximum setback that the building must be. So that's what I read, and unless I'm reading it wrong, then maybe it would need to be clarified.
So the parking area may be between the building and the road then.
Yeah, and that's addressed at a different standard, but that's what and maybe a follow-up comment would be to maybe not lump them together, but at least have them sequentially, one before the other. But there's another standard I think that we'll get to that's about the parking being to the side or to the back of the building, but if it's in the front, no more than 15 spaces. But maybe we'll just wait till that. But the way that I read this standard is that the building should be set back from the road.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That number 16 gets much more into the parking and kind of siting. So I'll make a note that those two ought to be adjacent or combined. Ellen?
I would just note that in the existing guidelines, one of the questions is, will the proposed development protect rural roadside character and improve public safety and vehicular carrying capacity by avoiding development fronting directly onto existing public roads? So it's a concept that was already there. But I appreciate what you're saying, Ken, that, what are we thinking? And I think, as Greg said, if you're in a city, you want the development close to the sidewalk, but in preserving rural character, you want it set back a little bit.
Can I make a follow-up comment
Okay,
on that?
Yes.
go forward.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thanks, Ken. I just want to point out, though, that if you think about the hamlets of, let's say, Slaterville Springs or Brooktondale, and I haven't been to Speedsville, but thinking about those, the Brookton Market, it has that nice little picnic area out front with tables, and it's on the road. I think, again, if these design standards are applied uniformly across the town, that's one thing, but to look at, how I'm not suggesting that these design standards should be delineating out areas of the town. We've already discussed that, and the sort of thought was to not go down that path, but just think about, if there was a proposed development in, let's say, Slaterville, if it would have to be required to be pushed back from the road. There's, not to get into this too much, but there's theory that if you bring buildings a little bit closer to a street in certain areas, it can slow down cars. There's a visual sort of psychology that it slows people down. It can create a little bit more of a walkable area. So I'm just going to toss that out there as just a thought as you're maybe crafting this language. And I'll be honest, I don't have even a suggestion at this point. It's difficult to delineate those areas out without the use of a zone.
Barbara Lynch.
Well, we don't have districts, but we could use thresholds or triggers to achieve some of the same effect. If it is a small enterprise, you may not have to worry so much about setbacks as if it's a very large structure.
Ellen?
I know without zoning, we can't make zones. On the other hand, I think what Greg was saying, that in the hamlets, which are defined in the comp plan, in the hamlets, it could be a better design thing to have closer to the road. So would that be something that we could do legally without zoning? Could we say, except in hamlets where the board may consider waiving, you know, this requirement or something?
It seems that, and there were only a handful of examples, or not even, I think even just maybe one or two that I found where certain design standards could delineate hamlets, but I mean that, yeah, and to basically say from this road to this road and this road to this road. So it is possible. It's, you know, it just adds a little bit of complexity to this whole process. And yeah, you know, that's, but I from what I understand, unless the attorney says absolutely no way, but Dryden's did that. They delineated out certain kind of areas along their, I think it was Route 13. And then another example that we looked at a couple weeks ago talked about areas delineated by roads.
I can consider it.
Okay, so one of the things too that I'm hearing in this conversation that I think the subcommittee has wrestled with a little bit is developing a list of targeted questions for the town attorney. So that one should be added to that list.
I mean, one thing regarding the town attorney that we might want to talk about is what would be the most efficient use of his contribution. And one option would be to give him a set of broad questions for his feedback. Another one would be to give him a finished document for his review. Knowing our town attorney very well, I would recommend the latter. But it's, so I would, my recommendation would be to forge ahead,
Okay.
recognizing potential legal pitfalls that then might be called into question. And I do note that he'll tell us in regard to a number of these issues that we just came up, the deficit prescriptive language is that will restrict you from being flexible down the road. I mean, I know that that's what he's going to say, but I think it would be more strategic, probably, to get the document ready and then float it his way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fine. No, appreciate your guidance on that. Okay.
One final thought on that, if I may. You might be, if that's the direction, you know, we'd go, then, you know, Barbara, what I would say is, you know, maybe for some of these, and Ellen and Michelle to consider, is that if the comprehensive plan, and I haven't looked at it in a few weeks too, if it does actually define, it does define hamlets. And so it might be something of adding the language of, you know, exempting out, or just sort of trying to delineate, using language to say hamlets defined in the comprehensive plan, you know, are exempt from this, or they're, or buildings should be encouraged to be brought. I don't know. You might be able to sort of just reference the hamlet areas in the comprehensive plan.
Okay, that's great. Great guidance. Okay, just in the interest of time, because I think we're about out of time that Tim had allocated to us, and we have a couple more groups of things to discuss. The next set of items are 14 through 18, which focus on on kind of building and lighting design and signage. So incorporating the use of green infrastructure, using architectural details that are kind of compatible with the town character, addressing parking areas and siting, and lighting and signage issues. So were there any concerns on any of those items, 14 through 18?
Excuse me.
Do you have any reason why number 17 is separated from number 15? Because what I read here in number 15 is detail about the architecture, right? And then you mentioned also on number 15 that exterior building lighting should be similar in color, and so this is like about it's almost the same topic with the number 17. I don't know. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, and we'll take a look at either combining those or at least making them adjacent when we do the reorganization.
Okay.
Thank you.
In terms of materials, one of the things that I noticed in a number of the design guidelines that I've read is that many of them designate or encourage use, and I was noticing, for example, that stone and brick are in the quote unquote excluded category, but many of them acknowledge the use of certain materials, but only say for a third of the structure or a certain percentage of the structure. So oftentimes they'd be used as lower ornamental devices up to the windows, that kind of thing. So it's just something that occurred to me. Whereas concrete masonry units is completely different from, would be completely different from that. So it's just something to think about. And I think
and that's a good point. In our earlier discussions, we had actually considered whether the very specific language about materials, including clapboard and shingle, and and brick being discouraged, should be deleted from this. Actually, because brick, for example, is rather sustainable and long lasting, compared to some other materials. So so we may suggest going forward that bullet item, the second one under number 15, just be deleted or rewritten.
I mean, I would encourage you to keep it in some form or another, because I think it strictly delineates the kinds of structures that the town might prefer. If you probably didn't get this yet, but this afternoon I did go around the town and shoot photos of the existing commercial buildings. What's shocking, through no planning whatsoever, is we have an incredibly consistent design standard across the town. Minus storage sheds, really. Almost everything else, even the dandy mini mart, would fall within a relative aesthetic of pitched roofs. The dandy mini mart, no, but I'm just saying, if you're going to build a gas station, probably that's the kind we'd rather have. In terms of, that's what design standards are. So, but I would encourage you personally to, I mean, I thought in the Danby design guidelines, for example, their material section was quite helpful. Michelle?
That's I just copied that from the Danby site. Those are Danby's. That bullet. So some of this, in fact, most of the next section are from the Danby.
From the Danby, yeah. Ken?
Yeah, just yes, on that one there, on that second bullet, the structure of the building could be made of masonry blocks, which then can be covered. And I wonder if clapboard, does that include like vinyl siding also? And if the building was in the right position to roadway, could the front be of masonry block but covered with siding, whereas the back could remain brick or block? It wouldn't be seen on the front of the road. You understand what I'm asking there?
I think those are really good
Yes.
points. And that when we rewrite that you're absolutely right, that should be on our minds.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah.
and
Thank you.
that I'll just echo that. That is a good point. And often either laws like this will say on the public facing facade needs to have, these types of materials.
Well,
Or
I would understand.
leave it out.
Understand because maybe the sides of the building may be facing public view, that you can see them. Some I've seen buildings where they're so close to the other one you can't fit a cat down between them. But other ones that were the adjacent buildings were far enough apart, you would see that siding, and I would say, okay, that's a view to have covered also with siding. So I think what I'm saying is I agree with what you say, the facade that can be seen.
Okay, that's real helpful, and we'll take that, we'll work on that language in the next draft. Very helpful, thank you.
Can I ask another question?
Yes.
On the first bullet, I don't understand what you're trying to say, small masses, but 1,500 square feet is not much bigger than some houses. I would think that would, and at first when I read it as 15,000 square feet. But it appear like what you're saying is, well, we want small masses, so we want to look like Boyceville Road.
Michelle, do you have a comment on that from the Danby guidelines? Is that accurate or is that a typo?
No, that's what's in the Danby guidelines. So I just included it because I felt like it was worth discussing. 1,500 square feet does seem small, but that's what's in the Danby guidelines, and I figured it's easier to take things out, to my mind, than it is to put things in. So sometimes it's worth just discussing another idea. So that's what that's from.
15,000 square feet.
That 15,000 is way too big.
Instead
That's
of
bigger than.
Bigger than anything we
So
have in the
they're
town.
just saying, yeah, they're just saying they don't want a big building like that, rather than have it broken up. I mean, everybody's got a different aesthetic, so.
So what I'll do is to make a note that the subcommittee needs to take a look at this and really consider whether 1,500 should be expanded at some level. But I'm not hearing agreement to move to 15,000. But 1,500 is the size of a small house. So yeah, that's a good point.
So if it was changed, if it was left the same, and a building was 4,500 square feet, if it was to be one building, you're going to say you're going to put up 3 different buildings, then have them put up 3 different buildings? Is that what I'm reading it says?
No, it doesn't say that it would be 3 buildings. It would be broken up so that the architect who's designing this thing, instead of one big mass, would have pieces. They would all be joined together. It would be one building. But rather than just one massive building, it would be architecturally divided and broken up so it doesn't look like a big monolith.
So instead of, for example, one big square, it might be an L-shaped building.
May I share my screen just for a second? I could just show you an example, Ken.
Let me get you the screen.
Oh, I think oh, disabled. Okay.
No, I have to just make you a co-host. Wait a minute, Greg.
Just really quick, it helps with talking about design guidelines. And I'm glad that Tim went out and took pictures. It really helps to just look at pictures. We think we know what a house or a building looks like, but then we start to describe it and it's just so difficult. Here, I'll just share my screen real quick. Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Yes.
So Ken, can you? So this, something like that, where the building could just be, it's one big footprint, but it's a simple just sort of altering the roof characteristics a little bit. It breaks up the mass of the building. It sort of provides a little bit more visual interest, and it just makes it a little bit, yeah, just more sort of visually kind of receptive to people, kind of like sort of the public kind of realm, essentially. But that's that.
I understand what you're saying, but also as I look at this picture, this place is a mini mall. The whole thing, the whole thing is one building, isn't it?
Yep.
I understand now how you're saying it's broke up, but that's
So-
not making
No.
necessarily a mini mall out of it. It could be all the same store.
Right.
Or
Sure.
retail. Let's put
Sure.
it that way.
Right.
Okay, I'm better with that then. 1,500 square feet. Now I understand what you're not breaking up the buildings. Okay,
Correct.
that's what I was afraid of.
It's more of an architectural design, and architects are good at these kind of things. So I'm going to stop sharing. Thanks.
Okay.
Can I just say?
Jill, yeah.
Oh, I just want to say real quick that that's one thing. The Danby plan does have all those nice photos.
Yeah.
That was from the Danby plan, which would be easy to include in our plan. But, you know, obviously we didn't do that for these discussions.
Okay. So let's see. Tim, how much time do we have, just so that we can gauge where to go with this?
As much time as you want, as far as I'm concerned. As much time as a group decides that it wants.
Well, we
I'm
haven't
all
a
for giving
half an hour left, so I guess the idea is if something else needs to happen. Okay, so let's just go to number 16 then. 16 was again the idea of focusing on parking. You know, some guidance with regard to parking and making sure parking isn't, you know, obnoxious, but is screened, you know, with appropriate landscaping, that sort of stuff. So any concerns about 16?
I like it.
Okay. All right, so then we'll move on.
Can I ask a question before we move
Sure.
to signage? Because I just don't remember seeing that. Is there anywhere, and I don't know if it's appropriate for design standards or not, but is there anywhere in the document that delineates distance from existing properties? You hear what I'm trying to say? Like a 75-foot buffer, or 50-foot buffer from an existing
Yeah,
property?
I don't think
Is that
so.
design, Greg, or is that
I mean, that is classic zoning.
that zoning? Okay.
But I've never seen it in design standards.
Okay. No, that's what I was wondering.
But we probably could try it. I mean, if we think that's important, we can put it in there. We don't have zoning, and it would typically be in zoning, but perhaps it could be, you know, the structure and parking shall be set back a minimum of 50 feet from every property line.
Michelle, well, Greg thinks.
Wait, are you talking about lights or parking? Because
No, facilities, the structures.
oh, okay.
Structures.
I
I think I wouldn't know where, but I believe there are distances, because as I've improved my farm barn, and talking about that, I had to be, I believe, at 3 feet from the property line.
Oh,
And-
that's a
and
general building safety, building code rule.
And that would apply to any of these developments.
What is that
Correct.
distance? Do you know, Greg?
Yeah, so Ken was referencing 3 feet. I believe that's just the uniform building code. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
That's for a farm barn. I think it has to be more for for a different structure, residence, I think, but I'm not 100% sure. I never dealt with that. But
Maybe that's something
you're
Greg
saying
can look
that's
at for
in
us.
Yeah, Greg, could you check that
another
out?
section, not,
Not this, right?
and
But
whether it
anyway,
applies to
do we
development.
like the idea of trying to put a 50-foot setback from property line? I mean, it does seem to me, if I lived somewhere, I would not want them putting parking directly adjacent to my house and my property, and I wouldn't want them to be putting a building that close to my house either. So personally, I think the idea of required setbacks makes sense. Does anybody object to that idea? So let's throw it in. I mean, if we told we can't
Or
do
at
it, we
least,
can't do it.
Greg,
I would object to
Greg, could you
the
research it at
50
least?
feet.
Research it.
I would object to.
Wait, I'm sorry, Tim, what was that?
I was just wondering, I mean, this might be something that we could put on your plate to research in terms of proper designation and proper place and that sort of thing. Because there's not much use in our putting stuff in that then our attorney will just charge us $250 to take out.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, certainly. I'll look at that. I mean, at this point, I'm feeling like these are getting to be very detailed design standards, and even just taking the work to massage them enough to where the group wants to present them to the town board might just be enough. What I was thinking, Ellen, when you were saying about distance from a property line, was talking about parking, and I was going to say that is typically solved by where you put parking in relation to a building. And so in these design standards talk about that. It talks about relation to a building, and that's what typically even a zoning ordinance might say. Every now and then something might say it can't be more than 10 feet from a property line. But if you're talking about other buildings and other uses being set back, and you want me to research that, I certainly can. I just think that those are better housed in a zoning ordinance. But if you want me to research that, just to be absolutely sure, why not?
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we don't have a zoning ordinance.
Yes.
We're trying to put in place something now. It doesn't mean in the future, if we have a zoning ordinance, we can't rethink where things belong. And when you say, you know, parking is typically restricted because of the building, well, to me, I live, let's say my property is, my house is behind this proposed development. We're telling them to put parking in the back. Do we allow parking to go right up to my property line? I personally think that's not acceptable to the town, but.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think, there's a number of ways, even just as we're talking about this, there could be language in here and in the language about parking that if it comes within X feet of a property line, it needs to be screened by either a vegetative buffer or other type of screening. That might be a consideration.
Which you're saying would follow.
I think that's a good one.
Say that again, Tim?
You would say that would be more aligned with design standards, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Correct. Because we're talking about site design, and which can house parking design. And yeah, so if it comes within 25 feet of a property line, it needs to include a 6 foot high hedgerow or something, or fence. But
Okay, we'll make a note of that, and Greg, work with you, or you can suggest language along those lines. So that's good. Okay. So number 17, we had the suggestion earlier from Usman, I think, to combine number 15 and number 17. So number 17 is pretty much out of the pretty much comes from the existing guidelines, and talks about the Dark Sky Association guidelines. So any concerns about the number 17 on lighting, limiting lighting? Ellen?
We also discussed whether the hours at which lighting can be used should be in here. And my guess is, Greg, you're going to say, well, that's not a design standard. The lighting design is there. To me, I would think that they should only be allowed to use lights while the facility is open. And then if it's a security issue, I was suggesting motion detector lights for security. So they're not on all night, which basically has energy implications. We're trying to talk about energy use. And I think it also has rural character, dark skies, neighbors being annoyed by lights. So I was suggesting we add something that also talks about the timing of when you can have lights.
Okay, so if Greg doesn't have an immediate response to that,
Yeah.
we'll include a note in here, and that could be for further research. Is that okay, Greg?
Yep, thanks.
Okay. All right, so number 18 then gets into specifically about signage, indicating that signage should be low monument style and not, big like flagpole type signs, at the top of a big pole. Unless the review board grants such an exception to do that. And, not digital signs with, big flashing lights, that kind of stuff. So any concerns about the principles of trying to guide signage appropriately?
And this was taken from either Danby or Dryden?
Correct. This was from Dryden, pretty much. I mean, it wasn't word for word, but pretty much from Dryden, yeah. Okay. Okay, so then looking at essentially the rest of them, 19 through 27, are energy use and building standard items. And for pretty much most of these, we're suggesting that a next step would be to touch base with or consult with somebody who's knowledgeable about energy best practices to make sure that these are still up to date and appropriate language. Our best guess, and Tim, you might know more of the history on this, but our best guess is that these items, which pretty much reflect the current Town of Caroline guidelines, were probably written at the time when there was a lot of activity and energy about the what was it, the energy friendly Caroline or energy efficient Caroline, whatever that logo was.
Energy independent Caroline.
Energy independent Caroline, yes, energy independent Caroline, because there's a lot of detail that relates to energy here.
Right.
And since that was a little bit ago, we just are concerned that, that the language and what this is talking about should be reviewed by somebody who is more expert in energy than we are.
And they would be the proper body to do so if time permitted.
Yeah.
And the town board would probably request that or ask for their endorsement or guidance.
Okay.
So that's conceivably something that could be put into motion sooner than later,
okay,
before even a final document.
Okay, great.
I would think.
Great. Was there anything in those final items, 19 through 26, that, or 27 rather, that that anybody wants to call out as a real concern or needing discussion? Ken?
Yes, the 21 there, since we don't know who might be putting up a development, and maybe it might be some local people have come up with something and need something. tell them that they need to put 20% more insulation into a building and maybe you have a specific place where it might go, but 20% more is going to do, first of all, be costly. Second of all, if it's inside the building, it may take up numerous amount of their space and they have to have a bigger footprint. Even if it went to the outside of the building, it would be probably then a bigger footprint. And I think an awful cost and 20% more insulation into a building, not that it needs sufficient insulation, but to add on top of that 20% more, I think is exorbitant.
And can I just add that this is current law? So this isn't a change. This isn't a new proposal, but this is current law. So it's 19.
That doesn't mean it isn't exorbitant.
So if it's current law, this would go back to point number one, which is that the site plan from the developer must adhere with all local, state, and federal laws. Okay. Any other comments on these? What were we on, 19 through 27? Okay, if folks are thinking about those, if you want one final, we'll ask one final time. I just have a question that maybe is more for Greg, which is the last question there in red, whether there is a mechanism in site plan design standards that could require the development to provide some escrow or guarantee that funds are secured to remove a building, should it ever be abandoned by the developer. I don't know if that would be a design standard. That was a question that we had. So Greg, do you know that?
Yeah, it wouldn't be a design standard, but it would be something that would go in the site plan review law.
Okay. Okay, any other final comments then before we turn the meeting back over to Tim? Okay, I'll just summarize then that that what we're going to do is we have notes from the subcommittee's further discussion this afternoon and all of the notes and comments from tonight. We will turn these over to Greg, who will then do his magic to flesh this out, reorganize, renumber, and clean it up, I think is what we're saying. And Greg, I think I can speak for Ellen and Michelle that we'll be happy to work with you and offer counsel in the coming days as you work on that if you have questions.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to make the comment of, nice work on all this. It's not easy to go through these, especially when you've maybe never reviewed a development. I know that Ellen has, but it's difficult. And so, yeah, just nice job. One maybe question I have at this point, but this might be something that we just look at when I start to put this together is, and we've brought this up a number of times, is that so some of these standards right now as they're proposed, I should just say these standards as proposed are assumed to be required for the current site plan review law. And so is your subgroup modifying the site plan review law a little bit in terms of some of the developments that would be required to go through site plan review?
So that's a great question. We kind of have had a running list of some of the issues that need to be raised about the site plan review law, but no, we have not looked at, nor I think do we plan to look at the specific language of the site plan review law, unless we refocus our subcommittee to look at that. Ellen, you're muted.
Thank you. We did send out what we thought triggers might be. So that's what I want us to definitely discuss. And that would be a change in the site plan law, not in, the standards would apply to whatever is in the site plan law. And if we're proposing different triggers, if we think 10,000 square feet is too big, let's set it at what we think it should be. So that's a separate discussion, not for, we came up with a proposal, but that's something the whole group is going to have to decide.
Right.
Mhm.
Eastman.
Yeah, I think that the trigger is important part of the economic impact review. And it's similar because I use the Rotterdam model, and then the good thing is you make this make it a smaller number. That's good. So maybe we can incorporate in, I don't know, economic impact review.
I think we still might want to have a conversation about the practicalities of economic impact review for the small town also, because apparently that would require us to set standards that would need to be budgeted in the annual budget for the town. It's pretty complicated, and it's also something that could imagine would trigger a lively conversation from the board. So it's just something that you all might want to take into consideration in terms of potential triggers, a different kind of trigger in terms of the trigger of close attention to this from other people. Ellen?
What are your thoughts about when this large group should consider the trigger questions?
I would think that we'd want to do it as soon as possible, because it would probably
Mhm.
impinge upon some of the could impinge upon some of the design guidelines, right?
I agree. Do we have some time to do it now? At least start it?
10 minutes.
Yeah, I think so.
Sure.
So did all of you get a copy of the trigger document that I sent out? Okay, so you had a chance to look at it.
Mhm.
What we proposed was lowering, so right now in the site plan law for commercial development, the trigger is 10,000 square feet or more than an acre disturbed. And say the proposal that's come before us or is coming before us is smaller than 10,000 square feet, but it does disturb more than an acre, so therefore it's under review. I think we are proposing lowering that significantly. So 3,000 square feet would be a trigger. You'd have to get site plan review. We also, I think, suggested, I don't have it open in front of me, that there are certain kinds of businesses like drive-through businesses that ought to trigger it.
Mhm.
That formula businesses ought to trigger it. And so that's something we all need to discuss and talk about what we would like to recommend as an amendment to the site plan review law. We also put forward that, in this case, we said any industrial development would trigger it. Right now, you have to be pretty big to trigger it. Any industrial development would trigger site plan review. We also proposed, as I said, drive-through businesses, gas stations would automatically go through a site plan review.
Mhm.
So maybe we should discuss that. We also threw out the possibility that there ought to be a maximum size. No commercial development larger than 10,000 square feet in town. I don't know how people feel about that. It would, allow things on the order of a Dollar General, and certainly, you know, the Dandy Mart and those kinds of things, but it means it would not allow Walmart. It would not allow, you know, a big grocery store.
Or an Amazon fulfillment center.
Okay, right, right. Or an Amazon fulfillment center. So I'll,
Ellen, you're muted.
Tim, do you want to lead a discussion about that?
What are people thinking about this? I mean, it seems like we could begin just by, I think the simplest, from my point of view, the simplest is the trigger regarding gross floor area.
Mhm.
I was the one, I think, who brought that up initially. 10,000 just seemed kind of arbitrarily weird. And 3,000 personally seems to me to be a reasonable trigger. One of the things just to consider about the triggers, although I just don't think that it might not be a consideration, but how much more labor and work for the site plan, for the review board, multiple triggers might be if they end up being benign. But this doesn't seem to be a benign trigger at all. Any other thoughts on that?
I'd be
Question
comfortable.
on, oh, you go ahead, Barb.
Sorry, I'd be comfortable with the 3,000 as the minimum for the trigger, and also with the any kind of industrial development would trigger.
Barbara Lynch?
Yeah, I have a question about, you know, industrial use. Are we talking also about things like dry cleaners or body shops? Because then you get a different set of triggers that might be related to water consumption or effluents. You know, there are activities that are not normally thought of as industrial activities, but are thought of as service activities that generate a lot of toxic waste. And should that kind of activity trigger a site review?
I think that's an interesting thought.
Is it, Greg, is it true that a lot of those considerations would trigger seeker in DEC review?
Possibly,
And
yes.
I think in our site plan law, there is something in our site plan law, unless I'm just imagining this, regarding water usage and water
Yeah,
density.
correct. Yep, there is a water quality. And water quality is, let's see.
Can
Yeah,
I suggest, in the interest of time,
Yes.
Yeah.
can I suggest that we turn it back to our subcommittee and say, think about hazardous materials use and hazardous waste issues, and think about water use and whether we need to flesh that out in terms of triggers. Because I think rather than discussing it right now and doing the research.
It is, yeah, and Alan, that's a good point. It is, if you look at the current site plan review law, water quality and water supply are actually detailed very, very, a lot. And so.
Good.
Yeah, I'll suggest that I would think that it would be helpful, rather than trying to talk in abstract terms, that we actually have a red line version of the current site plan law that exists. You know, red line it, showing what the proposed changes are, and then go point by point with the proposed changes, and do that for one of our shortly upcoming meetings.
Good idea.
Yep.
Can we
A
conceptually?
question about the,
Go ahead, Ken.
real use. Is heavy or even light industrial use buildings, I assume that's what's going to trigger, less than 25,000 square feet, so that we only need to say commercial or industrial uses having greater floor space than 3,000 square feet, trigger. And then when you come down to any commercial development is limited to 10,000 square feet, if industrial is 25,000 above, what is between 10,000 and 25,000 square feet?
So I have no idea where the 25,000 came from. No idea whatsoever.
I
And
don't either.
why the town thought you ought to pay more attention to commercial than to industrial in terms of the site plan. I really don't know why. Doesn't make much sense to me. Although if you have an industrial use, you're not going to break up the facade, and there's going to be a lot of different ways you would design a site if you're trying to be industrial. Personally, I don't think we want industry in the town of Caroline. I don't see where that would be consistent with our town, unless, to me, I would make some exemptions having to do with agriculture. If somebody wanted to do a yogurt processing facility, that's an industrial facility, and I would think that that is consistent with agriculture in our town. So I would try to make an exception for agriculturally relevant uses. Do people think the idea of a maximum size of development is something we should pursue? A lot of blank stares.
It definitely gets that. This is certainly a question for the lawyer, or it gets just a little bit harder to defend in order to point back to your comprehensive plan, to say that, you know, here's the justification for why we are restricting anything above 10,000 square feet. I mean, at this point, I wouldn't recommend having that maximum, but that's just me being pretty conservative right now. The town of Ulysses, I mentioned, I think a meeting or two ago, that they have recently capped the size of, they actually went beyond and said they capped the size of agricultural buildings at 20,000 feet, which was it possibly, they could possibly get sued, you know, by New York from that. So they've done it, and it was for agricultural uses, which are heavily protected by New York. So I don't think it's not impossible, but it's just something that just seems.
Would this, Greg, be something, and I just don't know the answer to this question, but could this be something that would be more germane to a potential development of zoning than to what we're doing right now? I'm just trying to think of stages for considering these sorts of things, and also how complicated a public discussion of this would be. It would be complicated, just hypothetically.
Yeah, it's definitely common in zoning ordinances to say this type of use is capped at this size, and that's that. But I have not seen it just outside of it, I guess, except, well, town of Ulysses is through their zoning ordinance. So I do want to make a couple other comments, though, if I may, while I have the floor here, just on these triggers. I don't think it's necessary to have a trigger for prime agricultural soil, unique natural areas, or scenic views, just because those are, it seems, going through the design standards, those are fairly well blocked out, that developments, you know, cannot impact those areas. And so I think it might not be necessary to have those as a trigger. Although, as I'm saying this, I think they already are in the site plan review. I'm sorry, it's getting a little late here. Let me just see about. I apologize. I was just thinking, my initial hunch was that you didn't need to say them. It might have been overkill. Oh yeah, and they are within the site plan review law. Any proposed land use activity that impacts a unique natural area and any proposed land use activity that impacts a critical environmental area. Oh, well, we've established the town does not have any critical environmental areas. So, I mean, I guess if you want to maybe add those in there just for now, and we could, I could either take that out or just keep them in. It seemed a little bit repetitive. I apologize for that kind of circling around.
I would think we can take a look at that as well.
Okay, thank you. And then the other thing is formula business. And so you all had seen Tim's email. They got sent around with a definition that we came up with. Is this? We haven't just. I mean, now it's 9:03. I'm kind of feeling like this. Might need to talk further about this, but the question is, do we add this definition into the site plan review, or if other triggers can already capture it? I mean, that would mean that if we lower the cap for commercial use or lower the threshold to 3,000 feet, then any formula business that's under that 3,000 feet could be developed. If it didn't hit all the other triggers in the site plan review, if it managed to weave its way around all the other triggers, it could conceivably be built. So I want maybe you all to think, do we need to add a definition as a trigger, or can we work the other triggers in a way that, one thought is, if we're saying any industrial use, I mean, you could just say any commercial use has to go through this. I know that there was a little bit of pushback or hesitancy on that a few meetings ago, but a lot of people were bringing up agricultural sort of commercial uses, but those are protected pretty well under New York. A roadside those are often just protected under ag and markets law. So the question is, do we want to still add in a formula business definition as a trigger?
And if we have formula business as a trigger, then we need to have the definition. So the question would be whether we keep formula business itself as a trigger.
And Greg, were you essentially saying if it's moved to 3,000 square feet, that would mean all formula businesses would be covered?
No, what I'm saying is, I apologize if I'm not being clear. If we define out a formula business, then anything that meets that definition has to go through site plan review and these design standards. But what I'm asking is that is there another trigger that can maybe capture all these businesses anyway? I mean, it's
like what?
Just being formula business.
But like what?
So like the gross floor area for commercial use, if it was.
But you're saying there are no formula businesses that would be under 3,000 square feet.
Oh, no, I wasn't saying that. I was saying, no, I mean, it is possible. It's unlikely that they might develop under 3,000 square feet, but we've seen examples where a Starbucks can be 1,500 square feet.
Right. So I'm not following you. What other triggers would there be? I'm not understanding you.
Well, one would be to even look at lowering that commercial use, or
Why would we not just say formula?
I guess okay, it was just a question.
I mean, Tim, do you think there's a reason we wouldn't want to put forward that any formula business should come before it?
The only reason would be if it seemed to be some kind of a legal trigger. I mean, that would be the only that would be the reason, But I think if we have the definition, it's probably okay. I think the other question, maybe the broader question is to go way over is whether formula business is cutting the square too tightly. So would there be other commercial businesses that we would want to necessarily trigger this? I guess that would be another way of asking a question.
Well, not in the triggers that I sent around, but in my head, I would want any gas station to trigger it. I would want any drive-through business to trigger it.
Well,
Barbara,
and we obviously need to refine this. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm just going to insert here that, that I think several of us were planning on a 9 p.m. Adjournment. I'm going to have to go. I think this is an important discussion. I'll reiterate my earlier suggestion that I think kind of talking in generalities like this at this late hour, it particularly is difficult. And it would be helpful to have a red line version, even a red line version that includes all the options, like including formula business language, including all commercial development, including all industrial or whatever. And then we can wrestle with which of that specific language do we want to keep and which do we want to not add in as recommendations.
Good.
Barb, that sounds good, but I'm unclear if your subgroup is doing that and then handing it over to me, or if I'm doing the site plan review and you're working on the design standards.
So I just sent you the design standards document, and so we'd like you to take a look at that. Michelle and Ellen, can we volunteer to take a stab at the initial redlining of the site plan review law? I'm seeing Ellen nodding and Michelle is shrugging. So I think that's a yes. I think that, yeah, we'll take a stab at redlining the review law. And Greg, you'll work your magic on making the standards good.
And one further thing that came up this evening was that there are design guidelines for subdivisions, and we haven't looked at those at all. My own sense is we have a lot already on our plates, and that I would suggest that one of the things we request for future in the town board is that we look at those for subdivisions. Add that to that to-do list.
Sounds reasonable. So
Can
do we
I-
plan for next?
Question I'm wondering about would it be possible to go to second and fourth Mondays and not meet every single week?
If we are going to want to present the town board with a document for action, I think it would probably be helpful to keep the fast pace and then suspend activities sooner than imagined. I don't know how you all feel about that, but I'm just looking at all the work you put into this and the acceleration, and then looking at the time schedule for big decisions that have to be made in the town board in the next 2 months.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of work to be done, actually, and doing it meeting weekly is going to be important to make sure as many voices as possible are included in that process.
Okay with everybody? And it's deeply appreciated. I know the town board is very, very thankful for the work that you're putting into this. Okay, well, I think we have a game plan for next week, right? And so we'll be in, I'll stay in touch with Greg this week, and then we'll be in touch with you
Good.
at the end of the week.
Barb and Michelle, you want to stay on for a minute and we'll set up a meeting?
Sure.
Great, thank you.
See you.
Thanks all.
Thank you. I'll leave the meeting open.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, girls. Thank you, Barb, for moving it. I think it went well. And
I was muted. I just want to say, I think that was masterful, Barb.
So this is still being recorded, just so that you
Okay.
know.
good.
Great job. Really
Okay.
a great job. Keeping everybody on track.
So when shall we meet again? Part of me is,
Before we discuss that, Ellen, are you able to get a Word document of the site plan review law so that we can actually mark it up?
I'm not sure whether I can get it in Word. I may only have a PDF, but I may be able to. Can you change a PDF into a Word? It tends to lose all its format.
I don't usually have good luck with that.
And do you
Yeah.
have, I just have Acrobat Reader. If one has an expensive version of Acrobat, you can edit. Do you have that? I don't.
I don't know if I do, quite honestly. I've had people helping me, so I'm kind of a neophyte doing things for myself, quite frankly. But would you be willing to contact Mark Whitmer or the town secretary or somebody to see if there is available a Word version?
Editable version.
Yeah.
As opposed to an edible version. Yes.
Okay.
I have
Thank
a
you.
question. I'm not really sure what you mean by a red line version.
Oh, just showing track changes.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. Could be blue line, whatever.
Okay.
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 So when
So
can we meet again? And, you know, if we can do it a bit sooner than the day of the meeting, then we can circulate stuff.
yeah, so I have some time on Thursday or Friday of this week. Should we start looking there, or what are your guys' availability?
I could do that.
Yeah, Thursday or Friday would be better.
Friday morning?
Friday morning looks pretty open for me.
Yeah, I can't think of anything that I have.
And what morning time is good for you, ladies?
9 o'clock or later.
Okay, let's say 9.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds Friday at 9. Okay.
Okay, and you'll set it up again, Michelle?
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, and in the meantime, Ellen will try to get an editable version, but we can take a look at least at the PDF I think that we all have and begin, putting our, just getting our thoughts together individually about what revisions might be suggested.
And is that our only homework at this point?
Yes, because Greg is doing the other document, the
Good.
standards document.
Good. All right then.
Okay.
Night night.
Okay. Very good.
Now, is there a particular area we're looking at for revisions?
The triggers.
Triggers?
Just, as far as I'm concerned, just the triggers. And maybe we should also look at how it addresses water and waste, because they were saying.
Yeah, there were a couple things, well, at least one, there might have been a couple in tonight's conversation in the standards document that Greg indicated should not be in standards, but should be in the site review plan law. So we should take a look at that as well. But I tried to capture that in the notes to the document. And I copied you both on that document. So you have that for your records as well.
Okay.
Brilliant.
All right, Friday at 9.
Bye.
Okie doke.
Thank
you. Good night.
Good night.
Velvet, I hope you're not there.